Can you assure this audience that Ukrainians will be at the table and Europeans will be at the table?
The answer is no.
Well, that's pretty clear, isn't it? Europe doesn't get a say. And at a time of intensifying great power competition, the EU faces a defining moment. Continue drifting into a vassal-like dependency on the US, or break free and steer its own course. And last week made that choice painfully clear. From democracy lectures, to economic pressure, to Ukraine peace talks, top US officials went out of their way to remind Europe who's in charge. And it wasn't subtle.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. We've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them.
That was the US Vice President J.D. Vance stepping onto European soil and with a straight face lecturing the EU about democracy and free speech. He accused Europe of suppressing free speech, failing to control migration, and most dramatically, of running in fear from voters. And at this point, we have to ask, is there anything more ironic than a senior figure in Trump's White House pointing a finger at Europe about democracy? Let's talk facts. Trump, Vance's boss, tried to overturn the 2020 election results. He fueled conspiracy theories, pressured officials to find votes, and when that didn't work, he incited a mob to storm the US Capitol. And he also suggested last year that if he lost 2024, he might have just rejected those results too. And free speech? Let's look at where the US really stands. A study by World Population Review ranks the US below many European nations when it comes to press freedom and free expression. Unsurprisingly, European politicians were not amused.
If I understood him correctly, he compares the condition of Europe with the condition that prevails in some authoritarian regimes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not acceptable. In our democracy, every opinion has a voice, and it makes it possible for parties that are partly extremist, such as the AfD, and they can campaign just as any other party. This is democracy.
And speaking of the AfD, Vance went straight from his speech to meeting with Germany's AfD party, standing alongside Elon Musk in a show of support for European populists. But still, Vance wasn't done. Days earlier at the Paris AI Summit, he had another message for Europe. Stop regulating American tech companies.
The United States of America is the leader in AI, and our administration plans to keep it that way. By preserving an open regulatory environment, we've encouraged American innovators to experiment and to make unparalleled R&D investments. Of the $700 billion, give or take, that's estimated to be spent on AI in 2028, over half of it will likely be invested in the United States of America. Now, we invite your countries to work with us and to follow that model if it makes sense for your nations. However, the Trump administration is troubled by reports that some foreign governments are considering tightening the screws on U.S. tech companies with international footprints. Many of our most productive tech companies are forced to deal with the EU's Digital Services Act and the massive regulations it created about taking down content and policing so-called misinformation. Now, America cannot and will not accept that, and we think it's a terrible mistake, not just for the United States of America, but for your own countries.
Translation: do it our way, or there will be serious consequences. And those consequences could mean anything, from tariffs to pulling defense support, or, as we've already seen, meddling in European politics. And then there's Ukraine, where let's just say Europe is being kept entirely out of the equation. When asked whether both Ukrainians and Europeans would be involved in peace talks, the US-Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, made his opinion clear.
Can you assure this audience that Ukrainians will be at the table and Europeans will be at the table?
The answer is no. The answer to the earlier part of that question is yes. Of course the Ukrainians are going to be at the table.
Well, at least he's honest, right? But is this fair? Europe has actually spent more on supporting Ukraine than the US, yet somehow it doesn't get a say in the future of the war it has helped sustain. One would think that as a major financial and military contributor, the EU would have a seat at the table. But apparently, in Trump's world, only Washington and Moscow get to negotiate Europe's security and Ukraine's future. And it gets even better. According to Trump's proposed peace plan, Europe, not the US, will be responsible for guarding the new border between Russia and the rest of the continent. Now let's break this down. If this peace plan follows a Korea-style demilitarized zone model, a 250-kilometer buffer zone between North Korea and South Korea, Europe will be dealing with a border around 2,000 kilometers long. That's 8 times the length of Korea's DMZ. For reference, the US keeps 25,000 troops in Korea and spends roughly $3.4 billion per year on their presence. Applying the same model to Ukraine, a minimum of 200,000 troops would need to be deployed at an annual cost of $28 billion. And that doesn't even account for the cost of actually building the DMZ, which could easily exceed $100 billion. Oversimplified? Yes, but the scale of what's being suggested is absurd. And the US expects Europe to take on this massive financial and military burden, while also excluding it from the actual decision-making process. Seems a little insane. And what about Ukraine? Apparently, even Zelensky is being sidelined in negotiations over his own country's future. In fact, he reportedly wasn't even informed about a US-Russia meeting in Saudi Arabia, a meeting where Washington and Moscow will be discussing Ukraine's fate.
Ukraine will never accept deals made behind our backs without our involvement.
And yet President Trump has already started delegitimizing him, casually suggesting that Zelensky might soon be out of the picture.
Freezing out President Zelensky of this process a bit. Isn't there a danger of that?
No, I don't think so, as long as he's there. But, at some point you're going to have elections, too. You're going to have an election.
He says he wants security assurance.
With European leaders increasingly frustrated by being sidelined, Macron has now called an emergency summit to discuss, hopefully, what an actual European-led peace initiative might look like. The meeting happened today, on Monday, and if noteworthy, we will create a video with its results. So make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay informed. In our opinion, this needs to stop. Is Vice President Vance right that EU overregulates? Probably. Is he right that European democracies could be improved? Sure, all democracies can. But this isn't a conversation among allies. These really seem like threats. Europe has spent too long keeping its head in the sand, outsourcing its security to the US, energy to Russia, and trade to China. And that era is over. It needs to be over. It really is time for strategic autonomy, and at least one European leader is offering a clear vision for what that might look like.
3 years of full-scale war have proven that we already have the foundation for a united European military force. And now, as we fight this war and lay the groundwork for peace and security, we must build the armed forces of Europe so that Europe's future depends only on Europeans, and decisions about Europe are made in Europe. Europe has everything it takes. Europe just needs to come together and start acting in a way that no one can say no to Europe. This isn't about replacing the alliance. This is about making Europe's contribution to our partnership equal to America's. And we need the same approach when it comes to diplomacy, working together for peace. A few days ago, President Trump told me about his conversation with Putin. Not once did he mention that America needs Europe at the table. That says a lot. The old days are over when America supported Europe just because it always had.
It really is ironic that it's a non-EU leader who's making the clearest case for European defense independence. And like it or not, the message is super clear. Europe stands at a crossroads. Either we unite as 27 member states, forging a true unified foreign policy and a true defense union, or we cling to the status quo, watching from the sidelines as Uncle Sam continues making decisions for us, not with us. Let us know what you think in the comments, and to support us further, please consider joining us on Patreon. Every contribution helps us bring you more in-depth discussions on Europe's future. Also, we have the German elections next week, so check out this video if you want to know what's happening. Thank you so much to our presidents, Jan, Sjoukje, Kristen, Peter, HEVD, and BJ. See you in the next video.